Good morning, Birmingham Public Library, and happy Pride. My name is Chelsea, and I am from your outreach department, and I am here with Catherine Osias from our archives department, as well as the Invisible Histories Project, Josh and Maigen, co-founders of the Invisible Histories Project. Their mission is to preserve queer history in the South. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. So I do have a few questions, but first I just want to thank you so much and just say welcome to the Birmingham Public Library.
Yay.
Yeah.
We're big fans.
Huge fans.
Okay. So first things first, what brought you to this kind of work?
Well, I was teaching queer history at the University of Alabama while I was in my master's program, and realized that everything that I was teaching my students was about places that were not the South. So we were talking about New York and Chicago and San Francisco, but nothing about Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia. And so it kind of put me on this track to figure out how do we fill in that gap. And so I went to library school, studied archiving, and in 2008 started the process of building the first LGBT collection that I worked on in Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And so that was kind of my impulse was really to fill in the gaps, because there just wasn't anything for me to look at that reflected my experience being from Alabama at all.
Yeah, I have an undergrad in history and then a master's in women and gender studies. And I, throughout that whole thing, even my history degree, we never went to the archives. I mean, I did see some primary sources, but it was usually scanned. It was in a PDF. We were really regurgitating other people's interpretations of primary sources. And that lasted all the way through. I didn't actually go into an archives until I got in a PhD program. And then Josh and I had been friends for a while, and I was working at UAB doing the gay stuff. I was doing LGBTQ resources and services. And we started talking about the work that he was doing in Charlotte to preserve the history of Charlotte's queer community. And we were like, can we do this here? And I think that I, was kind of frustrated with this ahistorical service providing that's so prevalent because, we're under-resourced and underfunded. So there's not a lot of time for people to really dig into that history to see what we've done and where we could go from that. So the possibility of centering history as both our academic pursuits, but then also as our community organizing was really important for me. And so that's kind of how we got together, started talking about it.
That is tremendous. And thank you so much for your work. But so you've mentioned funding and these gaps. Can you expand on any more difficulties that come along with trying to preserve queer history in the South?
I think the biggest one is that nobody thinks their stuff is important. There are all these amazing people that were doing work locally, but they were so hyper-focused on what they were doing to start an AIDS organization or to start an LGBT community center or to start a trans outreach program, that the work to them just feels very natural. And that work was so spread out because it was a community effort to make that happen. And so when we go to people and say, we read this article from a 1980 newspaper that says you were involved in this, and they're always like, oh, well, I mean, there were a lot of people involved and I don't really have anything. And Maigen and I often refer to it as sort of like the celebrity problem, right? Like we don't have like one person we can hang our whole hat on, because that's not how organizing works. And so because of that, people feel like their stuff is just kind of irrelevant. And so it's really hard to get them to see themselves as a part of something much larger and something that can still affect people today.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things, but we could be here all day. Two big things I think are erasure and I'll get to it. But for erasure, like the one, and not including the South in national discourses on queer mobilizing and organizing. We really are thinking about the coast when we're talking about the large urban centers, even excluding Atlanta, which is a huge queer hub. And so the South is really erased. It's also been erased when queer and trans folks have died their families have come in, and particularly during the AIDS crisis, and thrown away, even burned a lot of their materials, hidden their identities and their obituaries and things like that. So, we've lost a lot of history through that erasing narrative. And then also, which is connected to this idea that my stuff, isn't important. It doesn't need to be here. Why would I keep this? And then a huge part is distrust of institutions. And this is extremely important with queer and trans people of color, not having good relationships with, or the institutions not having good relationships with the communities. So why would you give your materials to a large university or a library or a museum that doesn't represent you, that hasn't been connecting with you? So that there's a huge trust issue that institutions need to do better at connecting with people, because when you're archiving, you're taking people's lives from them and putting it in an institution. And there is violence inherently in that. So if you're not negotiating that, particularly as white folks, like, you have to think about that historical context as well.
I'd say that there's a lot of relationship building in archiving. And, when you don't have the resources to actually really put a lot of time and effort and manpower, person power behind community building and relationship building, then you lose out on a lot of things. And so that's really for the archives where IHP really steps in and builds bridges between the community and the archives, so that it is recognized as a safer space than it may have been perceived as.
Yeah, I think there's, two kind of popular discourses around historical record. One is we need marginalized communities inside mainstream history keeping and making institutions. The other one is, no, they're too flawed and we need to keep them separate. We need to build our own places. And both of them are very valid. We, of course, are doing we want marginalized history in the mainstream record. And that's for several reasons. Keeping an archive, and y'all know this, is wildly expensive. And even established archives struggle with funding and keeping and staffing. So for grassroots folks to do that and keep the materials at the level that they need to be preserved is extremely resource heavy. So we're trying to use resource institutions who already have this, and then build relationships with the folks there and explain to community folks how the process works and why they should trust these people. So we're kind of a vetting, or an intermediary, a vetting organization for folks.
Yes. So to that point, we here at the Birmingham Public Library are a depository for the Invisible Histories Project. And I'd love to know from both parts, from you, Catherine, what this experience is like.
Well, a lot of times it's a quick email from Josh or Maigen saying, we have a collection, you want to come get it? And so I go and get it, and it's always fascinating. And before the pandemic, it almost always came with an intern to process it, which was a beautiful thing. So yeah, they go out, they do the legwork and the community building, and then we come here and we do the technical, the processing, the making it available, the access. We are basically the access point.
Well, and it really helps the work that we do to have such a strong partnership with BPL, because when we tell people, hey, give us X, Y, and Z materials, and then they say, well, where's it going? And we say it's going to Birmingham Public Library Archive Special Collections, and they're like, oh, well then yeah, of course, like we'll give you your stuff. And so there's a credibility that is lent to the work that we do because the community already trusts the work that BPL is doing, which has not been the case in a lot of communities. And all the smaller communities that we're working in, we say we're working with this archive, and they're like, I don't know, I'm not sure about that. And then we have to convince them. But to date, I've never had to convince anyone that it was a good idea to take stuff to BPL.
Yeah, and y'all were the first buy-in for institutions for us. When Josh and I started talking about this in 2015, We were mostly talking to universities at the time because that's our background. There wasn't a lot of buy-in. It was really struggling. And then we got introduced to Jim, and then Jim and Catherine signed on like immediately. They're like, this is amazing. Let's do this. And so y'all have the most. Y'all have the largest. You're the largest repository of IHP materials. And I'm gonna say you've got one of the largest, at least one of the largest collections in the Deep South of LGBTQ material at this point. So.
Yeah.
So we had been trying to collect and making inroads into the community for about 3 to 5 years since I started here, and then Jim had some dipping his toe in the water sometime before that, and it was an uphill climb because you don't have the time that is required. When you have to, care for a collection, and we're a public institution, so we are open to the public whenever they want. So we have to be here a lot of the time. So we don't have the luxury of going out and grabbing things down in Mobile on a Tuesday. And we had been trying to expand what we have as mainly a civil rights collection. We've been trying to expand it into more of a human rights collection. This was right in our wheelhouse. And basically, Josh and Maigen came in, they were like, we want to do everything that you can't do. And we were super selfish, and we were like, yes, please do this stuff and then bring it here, and we will make it available.
And we probably should have talked more about that before we started bringing in like coats and t-shirts. So much
Dresses.
gay stuff has so many textiles.
Yeah.
There's a lot of textiles.
So many.
Now, to that point, what kind of items should we be encouraging people to want to preserve?
I'm going to jump in right now and say, I would love some diaries. We love diaries. We have a lot of organizational records from nonprofits, and that's great. But what is also really important and interesting is an individual's papers, their photographs, snapshots, love letters, things like that. A lot of that is now digital, so it's a little more difficult to capture than it was in like the 50s when you were writing home from the war.
Everybody.
But people still write email love letters, I'm sure of it, or save little notes. And that's what I think there's a little bit of a hole there.
I mean, I don't know that I have like a favorite thing. I would say right now, we provide a working list of materials that we're looking for on our website at invisiblehistory.org. There's a toolkit for archiving from home that we developed for COVID. And part of that archiving from home is giving people a list of materials to kind of spark their memory. But since we only do LGBT materials, to Catherine's point, like I would say put everything that you think might be related to your life together, and then we can come in as IHP and sort it out. So that I would rather have too much stuff that we have to weed than one thing and we lose a closet full of stuff. And we can absolutely do that. Now that we're getting people again into the world at post-COVID, we will be getting our interns back into the archives and back into working with us more often.
Yeah, and Josh is really good too. If we get a collection, we try to keep it as local and as intact as possible. We don't like bursting up collections. We don't like to keep it where it's inaccessible to the community that it means the most to. But if there's like a really interesting piece, something that is super cool or really historically important, and an archive just can't take it, and there's all sorts of reasons why people can't take things, then, I mean, Josh has definitely, been hustling and making emails and phone calls, been like, can you take these rando puppets these puppets are cool. Please take these puppets. They're bigger than me. Just take them. And so he does try to find people across the country who will take things if they have significant, historical value or cultural value.
And that puppet thing's no joke. Like, I literally found a home in Houston, Texas for 2 gay puppets.
They are amazing and terrifying. It's delightful.
Terrifying. Huge. Yeah.
That is incredible, and also really encouraging to hear, because I know that there are lots of people now and in the past who live their lives in these intersections. So someone might have documents regarding, civil rights, but also be a member of the LGBTQ community. And it's like, well, what do you do with all of these things?
Well, and this is part of why it's so necessary to have a strong partnership with an existing archival repository, because these are the kind of back-end conversations that we need to have with people who are doing the work every single day, so that we make sure that the intersectional identities get, risen to the top and don't get, shoved into a box and sort of left until someone's smart enough to make the connections for us. And that work is sexy for archivists, but not necessarily sexy for the public. When, we're sitting around thinking about subject terminology, so that when you go to a computer and you type in any version of LGBTQ, you're getting to the stuff we need you to get to. And that's important work, even if it's, it feels more administrative, but that's important stuff.
Yeah, that's what I love so much about BPL. Y'all really want the stuff. You want people to touch it. You want people to feel it and use it. And you see that value in that physical connection. Digital is wonderful, but there's just something powerful about holding something that someone else has made before you. There's an emotional connection that happens. And I couldn't even tell you how many times we have found Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia collections that are very important. And we have found them on the coast, or we have found them in large urban centers. And if they have a finding aid, it's maybe like halfway done. And if they've been used, it was one time when it first got there, or by Josh. So, right. Boxes that have never been opened in 20 years that aren't local for the communities that made them. And I think that's why public libraries are so important, because they're telling stories that otherwise would rot. Metaphorically and maybe even physically. So, that kind of work and the access that y'all provide is really critical for marginalized history making.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Would y'all mind, each of you telling me what is an item that you thought was very special that was given a second life through archives?
Just one?
Besides the puppets.
Those puppets, man.
So while y'all are thinking, one of mine is, we got a Facebook message a few years ago, 2 years ago maybe. And it was this woman, her name is Janelle. She's delightful. And she had posted a picture of a 65, I believe, gay bard guide, International Guild Guide, that she'd found. She goes to estate sales and rummage sales and resales and does things like that. And she had found this guide that was in immaculate condition and was like, hey, I could resell this, but do you think that there's somebody who would be interested in this? And people started tagging us in it. And so she contacted us, and we drove to her house and looked at it, and it was just amazing. It's in a phenomenal condition. The binding on it is beautiful and thick, and it lists gay bars in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, and across the U.S. from 1965. And so that to me is, it's just, she just randomly found it in this house. And then she had all these other publications, these like magazines and things like that. And we found that, we were connected through Facebook. So that's just such a news, yard selling meets, social media. That's my personal sweet spot right there.
There's a costume that I'm in love with, that we got from Lucretia Foster, who is one of the founders of the Crew of Osiris in Mobile. And it's just this amazing costume that she wore one time, in the 90s. It's handmade, it's beautiful, it's gold. And the costume itself is pretty, but the costume comes with a set of wings that attach to the back that are, I think they're 7 feet. I measured them just recently. They're 7 feet from end to end. And just the idea that she wore that costume with those wings one time for this huge Mardi Gras pageant in the 90s just makes me so happy, because it's such a beautiful example of handmade in the South, in Alabama, costuming that was done to like really celebrate this community. So I think that's might be my favorite thing that we have currently.
I think for me, I believe it was a pride banner. It's like really, really 10 feet long, maybe not. No, the other one.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you're like, okay, a pride banner. But then a class came up from Tuscaloosa. And I think it was Josh's class, or it may have been that other professor's class. And watching them interact with this banner from the early 90s, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the date on it just off the top of my head, but they were riveted. They were so excited to see this banner. And that is what Archives is about.
Yeah, can we do a quick PSA? If you are in an organization and you're making a banner, make it with your hands. Do not get it printed. Do not put it on PVC. No plastics. They break down and everything else stinks. We cannot archive them. We will throw them away. So use old school cloth. Go get you a drop cloth. Go get you a bed sheet. Whatever you got to do, and get some markers out and hand make those banners, because those are archivable and they mean so much more to people. That's our PSA.
Yeah, they really do stink.
Oh, they flake all over other stuff. They'll degrade things around them. They're just
stick.
terrible.
Yeah, they're sticky. Yeah. It's a little queer history PSA. Make a banner.
Make a banner.
Make a banner, please.
Do it with your hands.
It's a t-shirt.
Yes.
Sure, yeah.
Yes. Oh, beautiful. And now, what are some engagement opportunities you have available to the public?
Well, we will have several events coming up soon. We are in the process of hiring an assistant director who will be helping us do some community programming. And so when this person gets on board, because right now it's 2 of us and we are in 3 states, about to be in 4 states, and we run a regional conference. So we're busy. But when this person comes on, that will be their job, and there will be tons and tons of ways to connect with us, particularly in the fall, the winter, and the spring. We've got a timeline of Birmingham LGBTQ history coming out in late spring of next year. It got pushed back due to COVID. So if people follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, they'll be able to find out what's coming up, and there'll be some ways. The biggest thing we need from folks right now is your stuff. So, contact us through our website, which is invisiblehistory.org, or through any of those social medias. And we want to talk to you about what you've got, particularly gay bar memorabilia, anything related to queer bookstores, anything like that. Photographs. We desperately need some pictures to put up on our social media. So whatever you got, even if it's just 1 or 2 items, let us know.
And I'll echo Maigen's call for gay bar history. Like one of the things we're specifically looking for right now are gay bar membership cards. So the ones that you fill out to get into the bars. And right now in Birmingham, if you have old gay membership cards of any bar going back as far as even 2 years ago, we have drop-off sites at Al's on 7th and at our place where people can take old gay bar cards and drop them off. Where we're very excited about getting gay bar membership cards and T-shirts from any gay bars for a future project that we're working
on. We don't have any programming coming up, but we are here Monday through Thursday by appointment. We're still by appointment for now. And I think our hours are about to change from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. So give us a call, make an appointment, and you can look at whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't forget, BPL patrons, we are open.
Right.
Very, very open.
We are open. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, and happy Pride.
Happy
Happy
Pride.
Pride.
Pride.